The night I was hunted in the woods. Posted by you/Greg Thompson _23 to r/LetsNotMeet. 3 months ago, I went camping alone in the Cascade foothills. I'm writing this now because I finally feel ready to put it all down. I need to get it out of my head. Sorry for the length, but if you've got 15 minutes, this is exactly what happened. I've always been the kind of person who finds peace in solitude. Not in a misanthropic way. I have friends, a decent social life, but there's something about silence that resets me. The city where I live, Seattle, never really shuts up. Sirens, traffic, the constant hum of other people's lives bleeding through apartment walls. So when I turned 23 last March, I decided to give myself what I actually wanted. 3 days alone in the woods with nothing but a tent, some books, and the kind of quiet you can't buy. I chose a spot I'd found on a forestry map, about 40 miles east of the city, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. No cell service, no nearby trails. Perfect. I told my roommate, Josh, where I'd be, sent him the coordinates, told him I'd be back by Sunday night. He thought I was crazy. Dude, what if you break your ankle or get mauled by a bear? I laughed it off. I camped plenty of times. I wasn't some unprepared idiot wandering into the wilderness with a pocket knife and a dream. I arrived Friday afternoon around 3. The drive had been long. The last 10 miles on a road so overgrown I had to stop twice to move fallen branches. But when I finally parked and hiked the last half mile to the clearing I'd picked out, it felt worth it. The trees were Douglas firs, massive and ancient, their canopy filtering the sunlight into soft green columns. There was a small stream about 50 yards from where I set up my tent, cold and clear. I could hear it moving over the rocks, a sound like white noise but organic, alive. I spent the first evening doing exactly what I'd come to do. Nothing. I read, made a small fire, cooked a simple dinner of instant ramen upgraded with a boiled egg and some dehydrated vegetables. As the sun set, the forest shifted. The light changed from green gold to deep blue, and the sounds changed too. Birds quieted. Insects took over. Somewhere in the distance, I heard an owl. I felt, for the first time in months, completely calm. I went to bed around 10, exhausted from the drive and the setup. My tent was a 2-person model, just big enough to stretch out in. I had a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, a headlamp, a knife, and my phone, which was essentially a brick out here but still had a downloaded podcast library. I put in earbuds and listened to some true crime show. Ironic, I know, and drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. My phone said 2:47 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure why I'd woken. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the soft, irregular padding of a deer or the scurrying of a raccoon. These were deliberate, rhythmic, boot treads on forest floor. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They were maybe 30 yards away, moving parallel to my campsite. I lay completely still, holding my breath. My first thought was another camper, someone passing through. But that didn't make sense. There were no trails here. No reason for anyone to be walking through the woods at 3 in the morning. The footsteps stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Silence, except for the stream and my own heartbeat, which I could feel in my throat. Then they started again. Closer now, moving in a slow, sweeping pattern, like someone pacing a perimeter. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as I could and crawled to the front of my tent. Through the mesh window, I could see the remains of my campfire, just embers now, and the dark shapes of trees beyond. I scanned for movement, and then I saw him, a figure standing about 40 feet away, just outside the ring of firelight. Tall, broad-shouldered, completely motionless. He wasn't trying to hide, but he wasn't coming closer either. He was just watching. I froze. Every rational part of my brain tried to come up with an explanation. A hiker who'd gotten lost. A ranger checking on campsites. But rangers don't stand in the dark without announcing themselves. And hikers don't move like that. I watched him for what felt like an hour but was probably 2 minutes. He didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, a black silhouette against darker black. Then, slowly he turned and walked away. The footsteps resumed, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep. I sat in my tent with my knife in my hand, listening. Around 4 a.m., I heard something else, a metallic sound, like steel dragging across rock. It came from somewhere northwest of my position, maybe 100 yards out. Then nothing. By the time dawn broke, I'd convinced myself I'd overreacted. The human mind does weird things in the dark. Shadows become threats. Silence becomes sinister. I probably seen a deer, heard a hiker with trekking poles. I made coffee, ate a protein bar, and decided to hike down to the stream to clear my head. That's when I found the first sign. Boot prints, fresh ones, in the soft mud near the water's edge. Size 12, maybe 13. Deep treads, the kind you see on work boots or tactical footwear. They led from the stream up toward a dense section of forest I hadn't explored yet. I followed them. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or the need to prove to myself that this was nothing. The prints led about 200 yards through the underbrush, weaving between trees, before stopping at a spot where the ground had been disturbed. Branches broken, ferns trampled, and in the center, pressed into the dirt, was the clear outline of something heavy and rectangular, like someone had set down a toolbox or a case. Next to it, driven into the ground, was a wooden stake, sharpened at the top. It looked handmade, the bark stripped away, the point cleanly carved. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I turned around and walked back to my camp as fast as I could without running. I started packing immediately. Tent, sleeping bag, cookware. I threw it all into my backpack with shaking hands. I didn't care about being neat. I just needed to leave. I was halfway through rolling up my sleeping pad when I heard the footsteps again. Broad daylight this time, no mistaking it, coming from the direction of the stake. I turned. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 feet away. Same man, I was sure of it. But now I could see him clearly. Mid-40s, maybe older. Flannel shirt, jeans, boots. And in his right hand, hanging loosely by his side, was an axe. Not a hatchet. A full-sized felling axe, the kind with a 3-foot handle and a head that could split a log in one swing. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just looked at me. I should have said something, asked if he needed help, told him this was my campsite. Anything. But the words died in my throat, because the way he was looking at me wasn't curious. It wasn't friendly. It was the look of someone appraising an object, calculating. I grabbed my pack, not even fully closed, and started walking toward the trail that led back to my car. I didn't run. Some instinct told me not to run. Predators chase things that run. I made it about 20 yards before I heard him move. Not toward me, parallel again, off to my left, cutting through the trees. Faster than I was walking. That's when I ran. The trail was barely a trail, just a deer path I'd marked with ribbons on my way in. I crashed through it, branches whipping my face, my pack bouncing on my back. Behind me, I could hear him, not running, walking, but somehow keeping pace, moving through the forest like he knew every root and stone. I reached a fork in the path and made a split-second decision to go right, away from my car. Why? Because if I led him to my car and couldn't start it fast enough, I'd be trapped in a metal box. At least in the woods, I could hide. I ran for what felt like miles, but was probably half of one, my lungs burning, until I stumbled into a ravine I didn't remember from the map. I slid down the slope, dirt and rocks cascading around me, and landed hard at the bottom. My ankle screamed, not broken, but twisted. I bit down on my sleeve to keep from crying out and crawled under an overhang of roots and stone, pulling my pack in after me. And I waited. Minutes passed. 5, 10. I could hear my own breathing, too loud, too fast. I tried to slow it, to listen, Then I heard the axe. A single sharp crack, like he'd struck a tree. Then another, and another, evenly spaced, deliberate. He was marking his path. Or marking me. The sound moved in a wide circle around my position, spiraling slowly closer. He knew I was here. He was just taking his time. I looked around frantically. The ravine continued to my right, narrowing into what looked like a culvert under a collapsed section of hillside. If I could fit through, maybe it would lead somewhere he couldn't follow. I crawled. My ankle throbbed with every movement, but I didn't stop. The space was tight, rocks scraping my shoulders, but I squeezed through, pulling my pack behind me. I emerged on the other side into a section of forest I didn't recognize. Thicker, older. The trees here were enormous, their trunks wide as cars. And ahead, maybe 100 yards away, I saw a structure, a cabin. It was small, maybe one room, with a slanted roof and walls made of weathered planks. The windows were dark, covered from the inside with what looked like plastic sheeting. The door hung slightly ajar. I hesitated. Every horror movie I'd ever seen told me not to go in there. But I could still hear the axe closer now, and I was out of options. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Mildew and old wood and something else, something organic and wrong. The interior was dim, light filtering through cracks in the walls. There was a table, a chair, a rusted wood stove in the corner. And on the walls, scratched into the wood, were marks. Tallies. Hundreds of them. I didn't have time to process what that meant. I heard him outside. I moved to the far corner and crouched behind the stove, pressing myself into the shadows. My pack was too bulky. I shrugged it off and shoved it under the table. The door creaked fully open. He stepped inside. I could see him through a gap in the stove side panel. He stood in the doorway for a moment, silhouetted against the daylight, then moved into the room. The axe dragged behind him, the blade scraping the floorboards with a sound that made my teeth ache. He walked slowly, methodically, checking the corners. He opened a cupboard, looked behind the door, ran his hand along the table. He stopped in front of the stove. I held my breath. My vision started to blur at the edges, black spots dancing. Couldn't pass out. Not now. He stood there for 10 seconds, 20. Then he turned and walked to the window, peeling back the plastic to look outside. That's when I saw it. My pack. One strap was sticking out from under the table, visible if you knew where to look. He turned back toward the room, started walking toward the table. I had maybe 3 seconds. I didn't think. I moved. I shoved the stove as hard as I could. It was heavier than I expected, but adrenaline did the work. It toppled forward with a crash, spilling ancient ash and rusted metal across the floor, directly into his path. He stumbled back, swinging the axe instinctively, and I bolted for the door. I heard him roar. Not words, just a sound of pure rage. And then I was outside, running again, my ankle screaming, my heart trying to explode out of my chest. I ran blind. No direction, no plan, just away. The deputies told me the cabin had been abandoned for over a decade, once used by a hunting guide who disappeared in 2011. The tallies on the wall were never explained. They searched for 2 days and found no trace of the man with the axe. No footprints they could track, no vehicle, nothing. One deputy, an older guy with a mustache, pulled me aside before I left. "You did good, son," he said. "Whatever you saw out there, you made the right calls. People don't usually walk away from situations like that." I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head. "I haven't been back to the woods. Haven't even been camping in my backyard. I still wake up sometimes, thinking I hear footsteps outside my window. I know it's not real, but it takes me a few minutes to convince myself of that. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted, but I know I wasn't the first person he'd watched. And I don't think I'll be the last. If you're reading this and you camp alone, just be careful. Trust your gut. And if you ever see a wooden stake in the middle of nowhere, don't stick around to find out why it's there. I saw torches in the woods where no one should have been. Posted by you/Marcus_Portland to our /missing411. This happened in October in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. I've debated posting this because I know how it sounds, but after what the rangers told me, I think people need to know. This is everything that happened, exactly as I remember it. I'm 31, work in it, and I'm what you'd call an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to camping. Not a hardcore survivalist, but not a total novice either. I go out maybe 6 or 7 times a year, usually to established campgrounds with my girlfriend or a couple of buddies. This time was different because I went alone and I went off-trail. My girlfriend Emma and I had been arguing a lot that month. Nothing catastrophic, just the kind of slow erosion that happens when two people want different things. She wanted to move in together, start thinking about the future. I wasn't ready. We'd had the same circular conversation 3 times in 2 weeks, and I needed space to think. Not to make a decision, just to breathe without feeling her expectations pressing down on me. I told her I needed a weekend to myself. She wasn't happy about it, said it felt like I was running away. Maybe I was. I packed my gear on a Friday afternoon in mid-October and drove 2 hours south to the Gifford-Pinchot, a section of national forest I'd been to once before with friends. We'd camped at a designated site near a lake, spent the weekend fishing and drinking beer. I remembered there being logging roads that branched deeper into the forest, places that looked wild and empty. I wanted empty. The weather forecast looked decent, overcast but dry, temperatures in the low 50s during the day, mid-30s at night. I had a good sleeping bag, a 3-season tent, and enough food for 3 days even though I was only planning to stay 2 nights. I wasn't trying to prove anything or push my limits. I just wanted quiet and solitude to clear my head. I arrived at the forest around 4 p.m. and drove down a logging road until it got too rough for my Subaru. Parked in a wide spot where the road curved, grabbed my pack, and started hiking west into the trees. No trail, just a compass bearing and the setting sun at my back. I figured I'd go a couple miles in, find a decent spot near water, and set up camp. The forest was thick, Douglas fir, western hemlock, dense understory of salal and Oregon grape. The ground was covered in moss and decades of pine needles, soft and quiet underfoot. I saw a black-tailed deer within the first 20 minutes, heard a raven calling somewhere overhead. Felt good, peaceful, the kind of solitude I'd been craving. I found a spot just before dark, a small clearing on the bank of a creek I couldn't find on my map. The water was clear and cold, probably snowmelt from higher elevations. I set up my tent quickly, it was getting dark fast, and made a simple dinner of instant pasta and canned chicken. I didn't bother with a fire, too much work, and I didn't want to deal with gathering wood in the dark. I was in my sleeping bag by 8, listening to the creek and the wind in the trees. My phone had no service, which I'd expected. I had a paperback novel and a headlamp, but I was too tired to read. The hike and the week stress had caught up with me. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up a little after midnight and needed to piss. Crawled out of my tent, walked about 30 feet away to do my business, and that's when I saw them. Lights. Moving through the forest maybe 300 yards to the north. At first I thought it was flashlights, other campers maybe, or rangers on patrol. But the lights were wrong. They flickered like flames, orange and yellow, definitely fire. Torches, I realized. Someone was carrying torches through the woods at midnight. I counted 6 of them, spread out in a line, moving slowly from west to east. They were maybe 20 feet apart, maintaining formation, sweeping through the forest like they were searching for something. I stood there with my dick in my hand, literally frozen midstream, watching. The lights moved deliberately, pausing every 30 seconds or so, then continuing. They were heading in a direction that would bring them past my position, maybe 200 yards north of me at the closest point. I finished pissing, still not quite processing what I was seeing, and went back to my tent. Didn't zip it up, just crouched in the entrance and watched the lights continue their sweep. Here's the thing. Carrying open flames through a forest in October, in the Pacific Northwest where everything is dry and fire danger is high, is insane. It's illegal. Rangers don't do it. Hikers don't do it. The only reason you do it is if you wanted to see better than a flashlight allows, and you didn't care about forest fire regulations or common sense. The lights continued their sweep for about 10 minutes, then stopped. All 6 of them simultaneously, like someone had given a command. They stayed motionless for maybe 2 minutes, long enough that I started to wonder if they'd spotted something. Then they went out, all at once, complete darkness. I waited for them to reappear. They didn't. I sat in my tent entrance for another 20 minutes, eyes straining against the darkness, listening. I could hear the creak, wind and branches, the usual forest sounds. Nothing else. Eventually, I convinced myself it was some kind of official operation. Search and rescue, maybe looking for a lost hiker. That would explain the coordination, the systematic sweep. It was weird that they'd use torches instead of flashlights, but maybe there was a reason. Limited batteries, better visibility, who knows? I zipped up my tent and tried to go back to sleep. Couldn't. Something felt wrong. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Search and rescue doesn't work in the middle of the night unless there's an emergency. And if there was an emergency, there would be helicopters, K9 units, lots of noise and activity. This had been silent except for the lights. And if they were looking for someone, why had they stopped so suddenly? Why had all the torches gone out at exactly the same time? I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, and decided that first thing in the morning I'd pack up and head back to my car. This wasn't the peaceful weekend I'd wanted. Whatever was happening out here, I didn't want to be part of it. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to the sound of voices. It was still dark, maybe 3 or 4 a.m. based on how the darkness felt. The voices were distant, muffled, coming from the same direction as the lights had been. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation. Someone speaking, pauses, responses, like a group having a discussion. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m. Still no service. The voices continued for several minutes, then stopped. Silence. Then I heard something closer. Footsteps, moving through the undergrowth. Not trying to be quiet, just walking. Heavy boots on forest floor. The footsteps passed maybe 40 yards from my tent, heading south, then faded into the distance. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened. More footsteps from a different direction. Then more. I counted at least 4 separate people, all moving through the forest in what seemed like a search pattern. None of them came directly toward my tent, but they were close enough that I could hear branches breaking, equipment rattling, the occasional cough or muttered word. This went on for 20 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Complete silence again. I waited until I could see gray light through my tent walls. Dawn finally, and then I packed up faster than I ever have in my life. Didn't make coffee, didn't eat breakfast, just shoved everything into my pack and started hiking back toward my car. I'd been walking maybe 15 minutes when I found the first marker. It was a tree, a hemlock maybe 8 inches in diameter, with a strip of orange flagging tape tied around the trunk at chest height. The kind surveyors use or forestry crews marking timber. But there was something else. Carved into the bark below the tape, fresh enough that sap was still bleeding from the cuts, was a symbol. It looked like an X with a circle around it, about 6 inches across. I stood there staring at it, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Forestry markers don't include hand-carved symbols. This was something else. I kept walking and found another tree marked the same way 50 yards further. Then another. They formed a line running north-south, perpendicular to my direction of travel. I counted 8 marked trees before the line disappeared into denser forest. I was breathing hard now, not from exertion but from a growing sense of panic. I pulled out my compass, checked my bearing, and realized the marked trees formed a boundary exactly where the torches had been the night before. Someone had marked off a section of forest, and I'd been camping right at the edge of it. I started moving faster, not quite running but close. The forest felt different in daylight, less peaceful, more claustrophobic. The trees seemed to press in. Every sound made me jump. I was maybe half a mile from my car when I saw the excavation. It was about 20 yards off my path, in a small depression between two large Douglas firs. Someone had dug a hole maybe 4 feet deep and 6 feet long. Rectangular. The dirt was piled neatly to one side, and there were tools leaning against a tree, 2 shovels and a pickaxe. My first thought was grave. My second thought was get the fuck out of here. I didn't stop to investigate, didn't take photos, just marked the location on my GPS, a reflex muscle memory from work where I'm always documenting things, and kept moving. I reached my car 10 minutes later, threw my pack in the back, and drove out of there so fast I bottomed out twice on the logging road and didn't care. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station in Randall, about 15 miles north. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called Emma. She didn't answer. It was 7 a.m. on a Saturday and I'd woken her up. I left a message that probably sounded insane. I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm coming home. I'll explain later. Then I called the Gifford Pinchot Ranger Station. I got a recording saying they opened at 8 a.m. I sat in my car in that gas station parking lot for 45 minutes, drinking terrible coffee and trying to process what I'd seen. Every scenario I came up with was bad. Best case. Someone was doing something illegal in the forest, poaching, marijuana cultivation, illegal logging, and the torches were part of their operation. Worst case. Something much, much darker. At 8:02 I called again and got a ranger named David. I told him everything. The torches, the voices, the marked trees, the hole. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, "Can you give me the GPS coordinates of where you were camping and where you saw the excavation?" I read them off my GPS unit. Another pause. "Okay, I'm gonna send a patrol out there today. Can you come by the station and give a formal statement? Do you want me to come now? If you can. We've had reports from that area before. Not exactly like yours, but similar. Strange lights, unmarked trails, signs of activity where there shouldn't be any. We've investigated but never found anything conclusive." That sent a chill down my spine. What kind of reports? I can't discuss other incidents over the phone. But if you come to the station, I can show you some things. I drove to the ranger station, gave my statement, and David showed me a file. Inside were reports going back 5 years. Hikers seeing lights in that section of forest. Strange markings on trees. One report from 2019 of someone finding what looked like a ritual circle. Stones arranged in a pattern with burnt offerings in the center. "What do you think it is?" I asked. David looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, we don't know. Could be a group using the forest for gatherings. Could be squatters. Could be something criminal. The problem is, every time we send patrols out there, we find evidence that people have been present. Disturbed ground, old fire pits, marked trees, but we never find anyone actually doing anything. It's like they know when we're coming." "What about the hole I saw? Did you check it?" "We will. I'm sending a team out this afternoon with your coordinates." He called me 3 days later. They found the hole. It was empty, already partially filled in like someone had started covering it up. The tools were gone. The marked trees were still there, but someone had tried to remove the symbols, gouged them deeper, making them unreadable. The orange flagging tape had been torn down. "We expanded the search radius," David said. "Found 2 more excavations, both empty and filled in. And we found something else." "What?" "Remains of a large fire pit, maybe 30 feet in diameter, arranged in a circle. Based on the ash and charcoal, we estimate it was used within the last week. There were items in the ashes, clothing, personal effects. We're sending them to the lab." I didn't ask what kind of personal effects. Didn't want to know. "Look," David said. "I can't tell you what to do, but that area of forest, I'd avoid it. We're keeping it under surveillance, but whatever's going on out there, these people don't want to be found. And people who don't want to be found can be dangerous when they're discovered." I never went back. Haven't been camping since, actually. Emma and I had a long conversation when I got home that weekend, and I told her everything. She was scared for me, angry I'd gone alone, and weirdly understanding. Something about nearly losing me or thinking she might have put our relationship arguments into perspective. We moved in together 2 months later. I still think about that weekend sometimes, especially at night. Wonder what I stumbled onto. Wonder what was in that hole before they filled it in. Wonder if I'd stayed another night, would they have found me? The ranger station never followed up after that last call. I checked the news periodically for any stories about discoveries in the Gifford Pinchot bodies, arrests, anything. Nothing. A month ago, I went back through my photos from that trip. I'd taken maybe a dozen shots on the hike in trees, the creek, my campsite. There was one photo I didn't remember taking. It was timestamped at 12:14 a.m., right around when I'd first seen the torches. The photo was mostly black, but if you turned up the brightness, you could see something. 6 figures standing in a line, each holding what looked like a torch. They were about 200 yards away, at the edge of the tree line. But here's what made my blood run cold. They were all facing my direction, like they knew I was there, like they were looking directly at the camera. I deleted the photo immediately, emptied my trash. Then I did a factory reset on my phone just to be sure. I don't know what cult or group or organization operates in those woods. I don't know what they were digging holes for or what they were burning or what those symbols meant. But I know they're still out there. And I know I got lucky. If you're planning to camp in the Gifford Pinchot, especially in the remote sections southwest of Randall, please stick to established campgrounds. Don't go off-trail. Don't camp alone. And if you see lights moving through the forest at night, lights that look like torches, pack up and leave immediately. Don't wait until morning to see what they were doing. Just go.
I found something in the woods that wasn't human. Posted by Sarah K. Outdoors to r/backpacking horror. I'm only now able to write it down. I've been backpacking solo for 6 years. I've dealt with bears, mountain lions, severe weather, and sketchy terrain. I thought I knew what fear felt like. I was wrong. This is long, but if you have time, please read it. I need people to know what's out there. Before I get into what happened, you need to understand that I'm not some weekend warrior who watched a couple of YouTube videos and decided to go chase Instagram photos in the wilderness. I'm 28, I've been solo backpacking since I was 22, and I've logged over 400 nights alone in backcountry across 7 states. I'm certified in wilderness first aid, I carry a GPS beacon, bear spray, and I know how to navigate by map and compass. I'm telling you this because when people hear my story, the first thing they want to say is that I was unprepared or paranoid or misinterpreting normal wilderness sounds. I wasn't. The week before this trip, I'd just finished a brutal project at work. I'm a civil engineer, and we'd been in crunch mode for 3 months straight on a bridge design that kept getting rejected by the DOT. 12-hour days, weekend work, my boss breathing down my neck about budgets and timelines. When we finally got approval, I had 2 weeks of comp time saved up, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it, get as far from civilization as possible. I chose the high Uintas Wilderness in northeastern Utah. It's one of the most remote areas in the lower 48, over 456,000 acres of alpine terrain, most of it above 10,000 feet. The section I picked was a 4-day loop starting from the East Fork Bear River trailhead, cutting through some of the least traveled zones in the range. I'd done parts of the Uintas before and loved the solitude. You can hike for days without seeing another person. I told my sister where I was going, filed a trip plan with the ranger station, and set my GPS beacon to check in every 12 hours. My truck would be parked at the trailhead, visible from the road. I had 10 days worth of food for a 4-day trip, a water filter, iodine tablets as backup, a 4-season tent, and enough gear to handle anything the mountains could throw at me. I checked the weather forecast obsessively. Clear skies, highs in the mid-60s, lows in the upper 30s. Perfect. The drive from Salt Lake took about 3 hours. I left early on a Tuesday morning in late August. wanting to get the first day's miles in before the afternoon thunderstorms that are typical in the Uintas. The trailhead was empty when I arrived, which didn't surprise me. Midweek, late season, a trail that doesn't lead to any Instagram-famous lakes, just the way I liked it. I started hiking at 8 a.m. The first few miles were gradual, following the East Fork through meadows still green from the monsoon season. Wildflowers everywhere, Indian paintbrush, lupin, columbine. The air was thin and clean, scented with pine and the distant smell of snowmelt. I saw a moose about 2 miles in, a big cow grazing in a willow thicket. She watched me pass with that dumb, placid expression moose have, then went back to eating. By noon, I'd climbed above tree line into true alpine territory. Granite peaks, glacial lakes the color of antifreeze, wind-sculpted trees that looked like they'd been growing sideways for centuries. I stopped for lunch by an unnamed tarn, ate a tortilla with peanut butter and honey, filtered some water, and just sat there listening to the silence. Not true silence, wind in the rocks, the distant call of a Clark's nutcracker, but the absence of human noise. No engines, no voices, no electronic hum. My nervous system started to unwind. I made camp that first night at around 11,200 feet in a rocky basin with a small lake and good wind protection from a ridge. I set up my tent efficiently, years of practice making it almost automatic. Staked down tight for wind, rain fly taut, vestibule positioned to keep my pack dry. I hung my food bag from a stunted white bark pine, cooked dinner, dehydrated curry that actually tasted decent, and watched the sunset over the peaks.
The stars came out like someone had thrown diamonds across black velvet. No light pollution, no haze. The Milky Way was so bright I could see my shadow by it. I stayed up later than I'd planned, just lying on a flat rock and staring up, feeling small in the best way possible. I fell asleep around 10, exhausted and content, to the sound of wind moving across the basin. The second day was more of the same. I hiked 12 miles, crossed 2 high passes, saw 3 mountain goats and not a single human. My legs burned in that good way, the way that tells you you're strong and capable. I made camp that night by another lake, this one bigger, with a small island in the middle. The sunset was orange and purple, reflected perfectly in the still water. I took a photo, one of the few I'd taken all trip, and texted it to my sister using my GPS beacon's limited messaging function. Heaven, I wrote. She sent back a thumbs up emoji. Day 3 is when things started to feel wrong.
I woke up at dawn to a sound I didn't recognize. Not an animal sound, not wind or water. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, coming from somewhere across the lake. Click, 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 pause, click, 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 like someone tapping 2 rocks together in a pattern. I unzipped my tent and looked out. The lake was fogged in, thick white mist hanging just above the surface. I couldn't see more than 30 feet. The sound continued for another minute, then stopped abruptly. I told myself it was a geological thing, rocks settling, ice cracking in a crevasse somewhere, something mundane, but it bothered me. I'd heard a lot of weird sounds in the wilderness, elk bugles that sound like screams, pikas chirping like digital alarms, trees cracking in the cold, but never anything that rhythmic. I made coffee and oatmeal, packed up camp, and started hiking by 7. The fog burned off within an hour, and the day became beautiful again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The trail felt different, quieter. I realized I hadn't seen any animals all morning. No marmots sunning on rocks, no birds, not even insects. Around noon, I found the first cairn. For those who don't know, cairns are stacks of rocks used to mark trails above tree line where there's no wood for blazes. They're usually pretty standard, 3 to 5 rocks, conical shape, built by rangers or experienced hikers. This one was different. It was at least 6 feet tall, made of dozens of stones carefully balanced in a spiral pattern, and it was fresh. Lichen doesn't grow overnight, and these rocks were clean, recently placed. It wasn't on the trail. It was about 40 yards off to the east, on a small rise, clearly visible from the path.
I studied it for a few minutes. Someone had spent significant time building this. But why? There was no junction here, nothing to mark. And who builds a 6-foot cairn in the middle of nowhere? I took a photo and kept moving. I found the second one an hour later. Same design, same spiral pattern, same height. This one was west of the trail, also on elevated ground. I could see both cairns from where I stood. They formed a line perpendicular to my direction of travel. The third one was a mile further, then a fourth. All identical, all positioned like markers or boundary stones. By the fifth cairn, my unease had solidified into real concern. This wasn't random. Someone was deliberately placing these, creating a pattern I didn't understand. And based on the freshness of the construction, they'd been here recently, maybe within the last few days. The problem was, I hadn't seen any evidence of other hikers. No footprints in the mud near water sources, no fire rings, no trash, nothing. The trail register at the trailhead had been empty for the week before I signed in. So either someone had come in from a different direction, or they'd been very, very careful about leaving no trace. I decided to camp early that day. I wanted to stop while I still had good light and could see my surroundings clearly. I set up a spot with good visibility, an exposed ridge with no trees, nothing to hide behind, 360 views of the terrain. I set up my tent, secured everything, and as the sun set, I sat with my back against a boulder and watched. That's when I heard the whistle.
It came from the valley below, to the north. 3 short notes, then silence, then 3 more notes, slightly different pitch, then 3 more. I've heard elk whistle, I've heard marmots. This wasn't that. It sounded almost human, but not quite, like someone whistling through a hollow tube, and it was moving. Each set of 3 notes came from a slightly different location, tracking from west to east across the valley floor. I grabbed my headlamp and scanned the area where I thought the sound was coming from, but it was too dark and too far to see anything. The whistling continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent with my knife in one hand and my bear spray in the other, listening. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, not hoofed or padded, the crunch of boot treads on scree, moving along the ridgeline about 100 yards from my tent, slow and deliberate. I watched through my tent's mesh window, my headlamp off, eyes straining against the darkness. I saw a light, not a headlamp or flashlight, too diffuse for that, too steady. It looked like a lantern, swinging gently as someone walked. It moved along the ridgeline for a few minutes, then descended out of sight into the valley. I didn't turn on my headlamp, didn't call out. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay hidden, stay quiet. Don't let whatever that was know I was here. The light didn't return, but I didn't sleep. I sat there until dawn, and when the sun finally rose, I packed my shit faster than I ever had in my life. I was getting out. My original plan had me doing one more night, completing the loop back to the trailhead. That would have been another 20 miles over 2 days. Instead, I decided to cut countryside, heading southeast directly toward the trailhead. It would be harder, no trail, boulder fields, steep descents, but it would cut the distance in half. I could be at my truck by nightfall if I pushed hard. I started moving at first light, navigating by GPS and map. The terrain was brutal. Talus slopes that shifted under every step, Krumholtz thickets that tore at my clothes, scree fields that felt like trying to walk on ball bearings. But I didn't care. I just wanted out of this place. Around 10 a.m., I found the camp. I dropped into a drainage to avoid a cliff band, bushwhacking through shoulder-high willows, when I smelled smoke. Old smoke, the smell of a fire that had burned out hours ago. I froze, listening. Nothing. I crept forward and found a clearing maybe 20 yards across. There was a fire pit in the center, still warm when I put my hand near it. And surrounding the pit, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 more cairns. Not 6 feet tall like the trail markers. These were smaller, maybe 3 feet, but same spiral design. There was no tent, no gear, no sign of anyone currently present. But in the dirt near the fire pit, scratched deep, was a symbol I didn't recognize. It looked like a figure 8 lying on its side, with lines radiating from the center. Something about it made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, not turning my back on the clearing until I was well into the willows again. Then I ran. I didn't stop running until my lungs were screaming and my legs were shaking. I'd covered maybe half a mile. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I realized I could hear the whistling again. Behind me, closer than before. 3 notes, pause. 3 notes, pause. I looked back and saw movement on the ridge above the drainage. A figure, too far to make out details, but tall, moving with a strange, loping gait. Not running, not walking, something in between. It was following me. I abandoned any pretense of caution and just moved as fast as the terrain would allow. Didn't matter if I twisted an ankle or fell. I needed distance. The whistling continued, sometimes close, sometimes far, but always there. By noon, I'd descended below tree line into a dense forest of lodgepole pines. The understory was thick with deadfall, and every few steps I'd have to climb over fallen trees or push through branches. It slowed me down, but it also meant whoever was following me would be slowed too. I stopped in a thick grove to check my GPS. I was 5 miles from the trailhead. 5 miles. I could do that in 2 hours on flat ground, maybe 3 in this terrain. That's when I heard the trees breaking.
Not branches snapping underfoot. Trees. The sharp crack of a trunk giving way, then the crash as it hit the ground. It came from my left, maybe 50 yards out. Then another crack, closer, to my right. Then another, behind me. Something was moving through the forest in a wide arc, knocking down trees, creating a perimeter. I couldn't see what it was, the forest was too dense, but I could track its movement by the sound. It was herding me. I looked at my GPS again. There was a creek ahead, running southeast, the same direction as the trailhead. If I could reach it, I could follow it down. Creeks mean open ground, better visibility, harder to trap someone. I ran for the water. The trees kept falling, guiding me like corridor walls. Whatever was doing this knew the terrain, knew where I was going, and was making sure I went there. Why? What was waiting for me? I broke out of the forest onto the creek bank and immediately understood. The creek cut through a narrow canyon, maybe 20 feet wide, with vertical rock walls on both sides. There was only one way through, follow the water. And at the far end, maybe a quarter mile ahead, I could see where the canyon opened up into the valley where my truck was parked. I also saw the cairn. Right in the middle of the canyon, built on a boulder in the center of the creek, 6 feet tall, spiral pattern. I was supposed to go past it. Every instinct I had said no. This was a trap, a funnel. Something was waiting. But behind me, I could hear the trees still falling, the whistling getting closer. I had no choice. I waded into the creek. It was only shin deep, but glacier cold, and started moving through the canyon. The rock walls rose on either side, blocking out the sun, turning everything into gray shadow. My footsteps echoed. Water splashed. I kept my eyes on the cairn ahead, expecting something to emerge from behind it, something to drop from the canyon walls, something. I was 10 feet from it when I saw the offerings. At the base of the cairn, placed on the boulder, were objects: a hunting knife, a watch, a water bottle, a hiking boot, all arranged neatly, deliberately, all old, weathered, left here for a long time. And behind the cairn, scratched into the boulder's face, were names, 8 of them, carved deep, some recent, some worn with weather. I didn't recognize any of them.